Hello, everyone. Welcome into another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast brought to you by GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Wednesday, November 6th around here, and we have a great show for you today. We got to start jumping into Week 11. It is a huge week in the world of college football. We'll get into Georgia Ole Miss first. We'll do that to start the show. Definitely a huge game over there in Oxford that Ole Miss badly needs to win. Then we'll do a little bit of a Texas two-step. We'll get into Florida, Texas, as well as Colorado, Texas Tech. Two games that are on different levels in terms of importance, but definitely two games that are huge this upcoming weekend, and one with Colorado and Texas Tech that is a downright elimination game in the Big 12 and in the CFP. Then we'll get into the CFP just a little bit. I'll break down, I'll go through each conference, give you guys an idea of my guess of how many teams get in from each conference and what the benchmark is, kind of how many wins you need to get to be a lock-in, how many wins you need to get to at least be in the conversation, and so on. We'll break that down in the third segment. Then we'll get to the upset alerts of Week 11. Definitely a ton out there, including a lot of top 10 teams that are going to be facing some really, really tough challenges this week. Then we'll get in my top 15, and it's a little bit all over the place after a crazy Week 10, but I feel pretty good about the 15 that I got going for you guys today. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have fun back and forth here, is to use that super chat. At the bottom of the chat on the Sports Network page, you can click that $sign, add any question, comment you'd like. It'll pop up on the screen, and we can have fun back and forth here. Definitely want this to be interactive. We're about to get into a really, really crazy time in college football. So any questions you have, I'm more than happy to answer them on here. And gsmcpodcast.net is still up and running, does the exact same thing. So either one of those you'd like to use does the same thing and definitely will be a huge help to me and the network. But let's jump into this game because it's a huge one. Over there in Oxford, Mississippi this upcoming weekend, Georgia is going down, and that's definitely something going down to Oxford, Mississippi. Apologies. Don't mean to be giving away anything too early, but let's jump into this one really quickly. And this is a huge one, no doubt about that. I think Georgia's coming into it with a little bit of an interesting approach. They're coming off a game at Florida where you win by 14 points. You have very little reason to be super upset. But at the end of the day, Carson Beck throws 3 picks for the third time this year, and the questions about this offense continue to mount. You have a ton of different things that you have to kind of figure out. And if Georgia were to fall in this game, they're going to the Tennessee game kind of on thin ice for the CFP. If Ole Miss were to lose, they're officially out of the SEC and CFP rankings. But the fun thing about this matchup is the quarterback battle. We talked about Carson Beck. He has struggled as of late, and really in 4 games, he's thrown 11 different picks, and 4 other games, he's thrown 0. Thing about that is, in the 4 games that he's thrown the 11, they've scored more points than he's thrown 0. So I don't know what that has to do. I don't know what the thing to take away from that is. Maybe it is he's got to push the ball downfield a little bit more aggressively and do that a little bit more often. Maybe it is just they played a little bit better at defenses and he was being a little bit more conservative in those games. Who knows what is the story there, but definitely something to watch. Maybe if he throws a couple of picks, Georgia has a better chance to win. Who knows? But on the other side, you have a guy in Jackson Dart that's coming off one of the best games he's probably ever played in his life. 515 yards, 6 touchdowns, 6 incompletions. He was absolutely incredible against Arkansas, and he's going up against a pass defense 52nd in the country, so 211 yards allowed per game. Obviously, Ole Miss, one of the better pass offenses in the entire country, gaining over 350 yards per game. So definitely going to be an interesting battle. There should be openings in the back end. The question is, can Jackson Dart take advantage of them, and are they often enough for them to take full advantage and be able to get the plays that they're going to need in this game? And I think when we talk about this game overall, we have to talk about the Ole Miss defense, because the reality is they're going to have to make plays in this one. I think this Georgia offense, if you avoid picks from Carson Beck, they're going to be relatively hard to beat. It feels like that run game is starting to get going, although they're going up against one of the very best run games in the entire country. Now on the other side, you have a run game for Ole Miss that is just downright bad, and they're going to be missing Henry Parrish in this game, it seems. They're only averaging 3.1 yards per carry last week, even when they went crazy. It was Jackson Dart leading the way on the ground with 47 yards. That can't be the case on Saturday. They're going to have to get running backs involved. They're going to have to get Matt Jones and some other guys involved in this offense if they're going to be successful, because the reality is Georgia's definitely going to have the pass rush to get home at least a couple of times. So you're going to have to get that run game going one way or the other, or the quick pass game is just going to have to be absolutely perfect if you're Ole Miss. And I think the good news for Ole Miss is they're absolutely elite at stopping the run on the other side. So will Trevor Etienne be the person be the effect that he absolutely can be? Because Ole Miss is number 3 in the country, only giving up about 90 yards per game on the ground. going to be really hard if Georgia wants to win this game, especially with Carson Beck's pick troubles. If they can't get the run game going, it could be a very long day for this Georgia offense. So they got a lot of stuff to figure out, no doubt about that. The Georgia defense, I do think, has enough to keep up with this one, but the reality is, if Trey Harris comes back, if you have Jordan Watkins playing the way he is, if you have Juice Wells, if you have all of these guys, there's very few defenses in the country that are going to be able to stop that for 4 quarters. Now, I could have said the same exact thing going into the Texas game. So it could be this is just one of Kirby Smart's spots, and he gets his guys fully ready, and they absolutely fly out of the gates and make some really incredible plays. But at the end of the day, I do think this is going to be an incredible battle one way or the other. Who's the best running back in the SEC, Big Ten, and ACC? Oh, that's a very, very fun question. The SEC, let's go. Oh man, I'm battling with myself here a little bit. Big Ten, I know it's Caleb Johnson. ACC, I'm fairly certain it's Omarion Hampton. For the SEC, that's one a little bit tougher. Maybe I'll get back to you at the end of this breakdown. Let's see if I can figure it out halfway through. But definitely going to be an incredible game. And let's get into some players that you're going to want to watch as we head into this one, because Cash Jones is a huge player for Georgia. One way or the other, he is going to have an effect on this game. He is really good in pass protection. He is a huge receiving back on third down. And with Trevor Etienne kind of coming off a little bit of an injury, it is going to be something that they're going to have to battle through. It is going to be kind of an interesting battle one way or the other. Can he get the opening that he needs? And also, can these linebackers for Ole Miss keep up with someone like this? Because he made a number of plays in that Florida game, including the touchdown that kind of put that game away. Then you got Dalen Everett on the other side, because he's going to have to face with some real wide receivers. One way or the other, he's going to get either Trey Harris, Jordan Watkins, Juice Wells, Caden Lee, who we'll talk about here in a second. Remarkable players on the other side. And Dalen Everett's been playing probably the best football that I've seen him play in quite some time. He's going to have to play really elite football on Saturday. Then you got Caden Lee. He has stepped up in a huge way with Trey Harris out. He has been kind of that second option on the offense, because the reality is he's a very, very talented guy, and he is someone that when you have so many different guys to keep track of, Caden Prieskorn and Jordan Watkins and Trey Harris, it could just be Caden Lee that goes for 150 yards and really hurts you through the air. Then you got Sunshine Perkins, a defensive end, linebacker kind of pseudo role for him. Very, very talented guy. One of the more athletic guys in the entire SEC, really, and one of the guys that absolutely can cause problems for these players as they get into this game, because you have running backs on the other side that are going to be tough to deal with. Someone like Sunshine Perkins can make that a whole lot easier because he's so talented, because he's so athletic. Anthony, we're actually about to get into what's going on with Carson Beck, because that's one of the keys to the victory, and we'll start with that, actually. The linebackers in coverage has been a huge issue for Carson Beck. It feels like he is forcing the ball into windows that he's not supposed to, and to a certain extent, it was something that a lot of fans at the Georgia level, I have a lot of connections to that, they felt like they wanted him to do that more. That was something that they felt like he left a little bit on the table last year, because he was a little bit conservative, because he was a little bit more, let's take the dump off, keep moving the chains, and just go about our business. Now he's taking a little bit more risk. The problem is he's missing a lot of linebackers that are sitting back into coverage, and he's throwing the ball pretty much into their chest, because he's not just seeing those guys underneath. He's going to have to be sure that he's ready to see those guys on Saturday, because Chris Paul Jr., TJ Daughtry, Sunshine Perkins, they're going to be problems if he's not able to do that, because he's thrown quite a few picks where he just underthrows a crossing route where he just misses a linebacker that's dropping back into coverage. Cannot happen on Saturday, because that's a momentum change that could totally change this game. And then you got to get creative in the run game. You got to find a way to get this run game going, because Georgia's defense only gives up about 100 yards per rush or per game. And if you don't have Henry Parrish in this game, it might have to be a little bit of Juice Wells. It might have to be a little bit of Jordan Watkins. You might have to play around with some different things just to get the opening that you need in the run game, because Georgia is more than capable of sitting back in this back end and stopping this pass game, at least stopping the explosive plays of this pass game. The only way they can do that is if they can stop the run game with the guys they have up front. If you make them pull down a safety, if you make them pull down more linebackers, it is going to be a problem for them on the back end. And then you got to hit the first big play. You are in Oxford. Your fans know how important this game is. They know that if they don't win it, they are not going to the CFP the way that they very much planned going into this year. Hit that first big play. Give them a reason to cheer, and really don't give them a reason to stop. That's the ultimate goal for Ole Miss, and with that offense, you have every ability to do that. And then on the other side, I think we just talked about it. Beck's got to not force it. He feels like a little bit, yeah, second guessing himself, Anthony, is a way to see it. It feels like he is throwing the ball in places where he thinks he should be able to get it. It feels like he is trying to create this offense instead of just letting it come to him in certain respects. And with all of the talent that Georgia has around, I know people talk about the pass catchers and they're not necessarily Georgia level. There's plenty of talent in that pass catching room. I absolutely promise you that. They can have a very successful offense if they pass the ball, if they just take what's in front of them. And frankly, that's probably been the conversation with Carson Beck pretty much all week, is just take the check down, take what they're giving you, and move on. He's thrown 11 picks this year. He threw 6 last year. I think that'll start to come down throughout the year, but definitely something to be concerned as we get into this one. Long sustained drives is something they're absolutely going to need. Ole Miss loves to play with pace. They love to get after people, and sometimes it doesn't necessarily work for them. They have a couple of quote-unquote injuries, but at the end of the day, I do think it's one of those things where if Georgia can extend drives, if they can get the run game going, if they take some of those dump offs and get 5 yards on first down instead of forcing the ball, and yeah, Anthony, maybe overconfidence in his arm, just kind of take what's given to you, don't necessarily overforce anything and move on to the next play. I do think that's something that Georgia can win a national title, playing football that way. You want to make the big plays, and I totally understand that. And you were able to with Brock Bowers, with Ladd McConkey last year. Maybe you're just not fully able to this year. Maybe you just need to take the 5-yard gain on first down, take the 3-yard on second down, and then move on and move the sticks on third. So it'll be an interesting kind of trial run, I suppose, for Carson Beck as he goes on the road in an environment that can cause you trouble. And really, in general, Carson Beck on the road has not been the best quarterback in the world. We saw him in the early parts of that Alabama game. We saw him against Kentucky. It's not been all that beautiful. Even against Texas, threw 3 picks. So absolutely needs a little bit of just kind of recalibration, and we'll see what happens in this game. And then finally on the defensive side, they got to be aggressive in the pass rush. This Ole Miss offensive line is good. It's more than fine. It's not necessarily elite, and it seems like they're still dealing with some injuries in there. So this Georgia pass rush can get after you, and if they can in this game the same way they did against Texas, it's going to be very similar result. It's going to be a fun battle and definitely one that goes very much back and forth one way or the other. But at the end of the day, I'm going to pick desperation. I'm going to pick Ole Miss with their backs up against the wall. I'm going to say they're going to make just enough plays to win this one. I think Carson Beck at least makes a couple of mistakes. I don't necessarily think it's quite as bad of a game as he has been playing, but I do think he's going to make enough for this Ole Miss offense to have that couple more possessions that they very much need in this one. I worry about the Georgia run game getting going the way it needs to, so I'm going to go with Ole Miss. It's a little bit out there on a limb. I'm going to go with the team that has their back up against the wall, and we'll see what happens. We'll see if they're able to get it done. We'll see if they can get that win. And Anthony, to answer your question from before, the answer is Dylan Sampson. I lost it for a second, but the answer is Dylan Sampson. He has been absolutely incredible for Tennessee and really has been the offense for a large part of this season. So that would be my answer for your question of who's the best running back in the SEC. But at the end of the day, it's going to be an incredible game down there in Oxford, Mississippi, and definitely one that if Lane Kiffin wants to do what he not promised, I don't want to say that, but what was expected of him this year, going to the CFP, possibly being in the conversation for the SEC title, you got to win this one. And I'm going to pick him to do it. It's definitely one that is going to be really interesting to talk about on Monday, but I'll pick Ole Miss and we'll see what happens. But let's take our first break here, and when we come back, we got to talk about a couple of games going on in the state of Texas. Florida heads over to Austin for a huge one. Colorado heads down to Lubbock, Texas with a massive one on deck, and we'll break it down right after this.